Tonight, you'll climb into bed, drag something warm over your body, and surrender your consciousness entirely while rain patters against the window and nothing whatsoever goes wrong. That ordinary act, drifting off dry and safe, ranks among the hardest single wins your species has ever managed. Consider what's actually happening to you the moment you fall asleep. Your eyes stop seeing, your ears mostly stop hearing, your body goes still. For 7 or 8 straight hours, you're nothing but warm, defenseless flesh, unable to flee, unable to fight, unable to even register that something might be looming right over you. In today's world, none of that matters. You've got a bolted door, a solid roof, four walls around you, and a heater quietly running somewhere in the dark. Now strip every one of those things away. Picture that exact same you, same body, same unavoidable need for rest, stretched out on bare, open ground. The rain has been falling for 3 straight days. Not a violent storm, just a gray, relentless soak that refuses to let up. Everything beneath you has turned to mud. Your skin hasn't been dry in hours. Wet skin loses body heat into cold air roughly 25 times faster than dry skin does. A real, well-documented figure from cold exposure physiology, since water conducts heat away from the body far more efficiently than still air ever could. Whatever fire you managed to build drowned out yesterday, and sleep still isn't optional. Your body isn't waiting for permission. Deny it long enough, and your mind starts to unravel. Hallucinations set in. Basic decision-making shuts down. You turn slow and foggy-headed at the precise moment your surroundings are actively trying to kill you. So here's the actual question driving this entire video. How did ancient humans ever manage to sleep through nights like this? When did stretching out warm, dry, and lifted off the ground, secure enough to actually let your guard down, stop being a bet against death, and become something you do every single night without a second thought? Because here's a reframe worth sitting with for a second. You probably assume sleep is automatic, passive, something your body just quietly takes care of by itself. It's not. Sleeping safely through days of unbroken rain is, at its core, an engineering challenge, one that took our species hundreds of thousands of years to actually solve. Whatever you're lying on tonight is older technology than the wheel itself, and almost nobody alive knows the real story behind how we got there. To find the beginning of that story, we have to travel somewhere that looks nothing like a bedroom. Northern Tanzania. A dry gash in the earth called Olduvai Gorge, roughly 1.8 million years ago. Stop on that number for a second, because it's almost impossible to feel properly. This predates Homo sapiens by a massive margin. It predates Neanderthals too. This is a smaller-brained relative built for walking across a hot savanna, so far back in time that calling them people already feels generous. In the 1970s, the archaeologist Mary Leakey uncovered a rough ring of basalt stones sitting in that ancient soil, spaced and piled in a way that, to her trained eye, looked deliberately placed rather than accidental, resembling the stone bases some modern people still use today to anchor a simple windbreak or brush shelter against the wind. Wedge branches between the rocks, stack them into a low wall facing the weather, and you have the crudest possible roof imaginable, just barely enough to matter. If Leakey read that circle correctly, it rewrites the popular image of early humans as helpless creatures simply absorbing whatever the sky threw at them. It would mean that before our own species even existed, something out there on that plain was already looking up at the rain and deciding not tonight. The first true act of engineering may not have been a weapon at all. It may have been a wall, built purely so a body could lie down behind it and rest. But here's the honest complication, because the honest version of any story always ends up being the better one. We genuinely don't know if Leakey was right about any of it. Some archaeologists examining that same stone ring today see a shelter. Others see nothing but ordinary geology at work, stones shifted gradually by water, tree roots, and roughly 1 million years of ground quietly settling and heaving. There's no surviving roof, no charred post fragment, no proof a single branch ever actually stood there, just a scatter of rocks and an argument that has never fully closed among specialists. That's the deepest, most frustrating problem running through this entire investigation. Sleep leaves almost nothing behind for anyone to find later. A bed of leaves rots away within a season. A hide blanket decomposes into nothing. A simple brush wall collapses into dirt and disappears entirely within a few short years. The single most important thing an ancient human did every single night is also, cruelly, the thing least likely to survive for us to ever find: a ghost built by its very nature, to vanish completely by morning. Olduvai gives us only a tantalizing, unresolved maybe. The next piece of ground gives us something closer to actual proof. Southern France, a hillside overlooking modern Nice, roughly 400,000 years ago. In 1966, archaeologist Henry de Lumley was excavating a site called Terra Amata when he uncovered a pattern in the sediment that stopped him cold. Dark stains, marking where wooden posts once likely stood, arranged in neat ovals. Rings of stones that appeared to have braced the base of walls and scooped out hearths sitting inside those ovals, some with a small stone windbreak positioned on one side against the prevailing weather. De Lumley interpreted the whole layout as genuine huts, dome-shaped shelters roughly 3 to 4 meters across, built with a fire burning inside and a windbreak angled to block the elements. This almost certainly wasn't Homo sapiens either. It was more likely Homo heidelbergensis, thick-boned and heavy-browed, precisely the kind of face you'd casually label a caveman without thinking twice. And that's exactly where the reversal happens. Because the cartoon caveman doesn't build shelter at all. He simply crawls into whatever cave happens to be lying around. Terra Amata suggests something entirely different. On an open hillside with no cave anywhere in sight, someone deliberately drove posts into the earth, bent branches into a roof, and lit a fire directly underneath it, specifically to keep the rain and cold locked outside where they belonged. A roof alone sheds rain. A fire alone gives off heat the wind steals right back. Combine them, and you get a dry, warm pocket of air you can actually lie down inside while the world drips around you. The entire problem this video opened with, apparently solved before our own species had even arrived. Except, predictably, Terra Amata is also contested. Some archaeologists who've re-examined the site doubt those post holes are post holes at all, arguing the layers may have been disturbed by later ground movement and that stains in ancient soil can be read more than one way. The huts might be real, or they might be a shape one brilliant excavator's eye assembled out of ambiguous noise. Two sites in, and both remain beautiful. Suggestive maybes. If you're already convinced the most ordinary thing you do every single night is secretly this ancient, stick around. Because the evidence only gets stranger from here on out. And if you want more of this kind of dig into the hidden engineering behind everyday life, go ahead and subscribe now before you forget. The next site stops handing us stains to interpret and finally gives us the bedding itself, physically intact. Border Cave, straddling the border of South Africa and Eswatini, high in the Lubombo Mountains, roughly 200,000 years ago, give or take the very moment Homo sapiens was coming into existence as a distinct species. In 2020, a team led by archaeologist Lynn Wadley published findings in the journal Science, describing actual preserved grass bedding, broadleaf grasses cut and layered onto the cave floor in distinct sheets, physically surviving 200,000 years, thanks to the specific mineral-rich way the cave sealed and protected organic material from decay. Beneath that grass, Wadley's team found repeated layers of ash, and the placement clearly wasn't accidental or incidental. People appear to have deliberately laid fresh bedding directly on top of that ash, layer after layer, over an extended span of time. Fine ash clogs the tiny breathing structures insects rely on and dries out their bodies from the inside, forming a barrier ticks, mites, and other biting pests don't want to cross. At the very dawn of our species, people were already treating their sleeping surface specifically to keep out the things that bite and spread disease. Evidence of something close to genuine hygiene, an early understanding that a bed isn't just soft ground, it's a defended, maintained position. And if humans were already managing bedding this deliberately 200,000 years ago, this clearly wasn't the starting point of the practice. There's a long, unseen history of trial and failure sitting somewhere behind it that the archaeological record simply hasn't preserved. The next stop shows that this wasn't just a good idea repeated by luck, but an actual maintained system. Still South Africa, a rock shelter called Sibudu above the Tongati River, roughly 77,000 years ago. The same archaeologist, Lynn Wadley, publishing again in Science, this time in 2011. Her team found layered, compacted plant bedding pressed into the shelter floor in sheets. And when they identified the specific plants used, the story cracked wide open. The bedding included leaves from Cryptocarya woodii, the Cape laurel, a plant that, when crushed, releases compounds genuinely toxic to mosquito larvae and other biting insects. Not merely repellent, but lethal to them. 77,000 years ago, someone walked past dozens of soft, comfortable plants and specifically chose the one whose leaves poison the things that bite you while you sleep. A decision built on accumulated, transmitted knowledge about exactly which leaf keeps a person safer through the night. Wadley's team also found something almost harder to believe. Repeating layers of bedding, then a band of charred material, then fresh bedding laid on top again, over and over in sequence across the excavated floor. Read in order. That's not just debris, it's a recorded action. People periodically burned their old, spent bedding down to ash right where it lay, then laid a clean new layer over the freshly sterilized ground. Essentially, running laundry and pest control 77,000 years before anyone had invented a needle and thread, let alone a washing machine. Every piece of the popular caveman image, the grunting brute simply enduring whatever nature handed him, gets flipped completely by this evidence. Sibudu doesn't show a creature enduring its environment passively. It shows a mind actively managing one, selecting materials specifically for their chemical properties, and maintaining a repeating system with tomorrow night and the night after that already in mind. There's a related fire archaeology thread worth mentioning here that adds real weight to this picture. Excavations at Qusim Cave in Israel, led by archaeologists Rand Barkai and Avi Gopher, revealed a central hearth used habitually by around 3 to 400,000 years ago, with the surrounding flint debris arranged in a pattern suggesting people consistently sat and worked in specific zones radiating outward from that fire. That layout implies fire wasn't just a heat source people happened to sit near. It was already organizing where bodies gathered, rested, and likely slept. Centuries before Sibudu's insecticidal bedding or Border Cave's ash-lined mattresses ever existed. Even a perfectly engineered, self-cleaning, insect-resistant bed still leaves one enormous problem unsolved, and it's the exact one this video opened with. Left out through 3 days of rain, even the best bedding becomes a cold-soaked sponge. It handles the bugs. It does almost nothing about water or cold. And cold is the real killer, because the danger was never only what might crawl onto you. It's what happens inside a body that goes still, wet, and slowly loses the ability to warm itself, which forces a harder question. Lying there defenseless in the dark and the wet, what actually kept a person alive? The honest answer isn't a better bed. It's fire. And more specifically, the person tending it through the darkest, wettest hours. For a long time, researchers simply assumed early humans slept the way modern sleep advice tells us we should. One solid, unbroken block running from sundown straight through to sunrise. In 2017, researchers David Sampson and Charles Nunn published a study in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B that quietly upended that entire assumption. They studied the Hadza, hunter-gatherers in Tanzania who still sleep largely the way humans have for most of our species' history, out in the open, together, under open sky with no walls at all. Tracking a Hadza camp of 33 adults across 20 separate nights using wrist-worn activity monitors, they found that across the entire night, there were, on average, only about 18 minutes total when every single person in camp happened to be asleep at the exact same time. For the rest of the night, someone was reliably awake, not standing any kind of formal, assigned guard, just up, tending the fire, shifting position, lying there with eyes open for no reason. They could clearly explain if asked directly. Older members of the group consistently tended to wake and fall asleep earlier in the evening, while younger members drifted off and rose later. And layering those naturally different internal clocks across one shared camp produced an entirely unplanned, rolling watch that nobody had consciously organized or agreed to. There was almost always at least one pair of open eyes somewhere near the fire, all night, every night. It's worth being upfront that this specific interpretation isn't universally accepted across the field. Some sleep researchers, including UCLA neuroscientist Jerome Siegel, whose own separate work on modern hunter-gatherer sleep patterns is widely cited, have cautioned that fragmented, staggered sleep timing across a group could simply reflect ordinary biological variation in individual internal clocks by age, rather than any trait that evolved specifically for group protection or coordinated watchkeeping. Sampson and Nunn's sentinel hypothesis is a compelling, genuinely well supported interpretation of real, carefully gathered data, not an unquestioned, settled fact. And it's fair to hold both possibilities in mind at once. Either way, the practical, on the ground effect is the same regardless of which explanation is correct. A fire burning in the open through 3 days of rain absolutely does not tend itself. Someone has to keep dry fuel held in reserve, coax dying coals back to life in the wet, dark hours before dawn, and shelter the flame under whatever scrap of cover exists nearby. For most of human history, sleep simply wasn't the private, sealed off experience it is for you tonight. It was communal, genuinely vulnerable, and built around a shared fire and a loose ring of bodies quietly taking unspoken turns being the one still awake. The Hadza sleep under a relatively forgiving sky, most of the year at least. Push north into a landscape with absolutely none of that forgiveness, and you find the single most extreme solution humans ever engineered for this exact problem. The Ice Age steppe of eastern Ukraine, near a village now called Mezerich, roughly 20,000 years ago. Out here, the entire logic built up over every previous site simply breaks down, because there's no cave for hundreds of miles in any direction and barely any trees at all, just open grass, relentless wind, ice, and rain turning straight to sleet, with nothing whatsoever to hide under. So people built shelter out of the one large resource the open steppe genuinely offered in abundance: mammoths. Archaeologists working at Mezerich uncovered the remains of dwellings constructed almost entirely from mammoth bone, with one structure alone incorporating bones drawn from dozens of individual animals, massive jawbones interlocked in a tight herringbone pattern to form the walls, long bones and curved tusks arched overhead to frame a dome, the whole frame then covered over with hides and turf and sealed shut with a hearth burning steadily inside. A single mammoth skull alone can weigh well over 200 pounds, and dragging, stacking, and precisely engineering literal tons of bone into a self-supporting dome represents a genuinely staggering amount of coordinated group, labor, and planning. It's worth noting that archaeologists still actively debate exactly how these bones were sourced in the first place, since gathering that sheer volume of material may have involved scavenging bones accumulated at natural mammoth graveyards over many generations, rather than purely fresh, large-scale hunting on demand, a detail that doesn't diminish the engineering achievement itself, but does meaningfully complicate the simplest version of the story most people tell. Either way, when the surrounding landscape offered absolutely nothing to shelter under, people turned the skeleton of the largest animal on the horizon into functional, weatherproof architecture. There was one final piece of this puzzle left, the piece that carries the whole story all the way to the roof over your head tonight. Orkney, off the northern tip of Scotland, a tight cluster of stone houses buried inside a sand dune for roughly 5,000 years, known today as Skara Brae, generally dated to somewhere around 3,200 to 2,500 years before the Common Era, meaning parts of this settlement genuinely predate both Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid of Giza. By this point, the Ice Age is long over and farming has firmly arrived, and on this treeless, relentlessly rain-battered island, people built stone houses with walls made of flat slabs set into mounded earth for insulation, so well preserved by the sand that buried them that you can still walk the entire floor plan today, thousands of years later. Built directly into the stone against the wall of every single house are actual bed frames, slabs set upright on edge, and once filled soft with bracken, heather, and hides for warmth. There's a central hearth in every home, stone shelves for storage, small sunken stone tanks that may have held water or bait for fishing. It is unmistakably a home built specifically around the daily act of sleeping warm, dry, and off the cold ground. The roofs themselves are long gone, weathered away over the millennia, but were most likely rafters of whalebone or scarce local driftwood thatched over with turf and straw. And a thatched roof isn't just a lid sitting on top of a room, it's a deliberately calculated slope, angled precisely so rain sheds away from the space where a body actually lies rather than pooling and soaking straight through. That's the exact same basic principle, keeping water off you right now, tonight, simply refined and thinned across thousands of additional years, never truly reinvented from scratch. So, how did ancient humans sleep through endless rain? There was no single inventor, no clean eureka moment, no one date you could circle on a timeline. Instead, there's a long, genuinely imperfect chain of partial solutions. A stone windbreak that may be 1.8 million years old, a contested hut on a French hillside, a habitually tended hearth at Kesem organizing where bodies gathered to rest, grass deliberately laid on ash at the very dawn of our species, an insecticidal, self-cleaning bed maintained at Sibudu, a fire kept alive through the wettest hours by sleepers unknowingly rotating an unplanned watch, an entire house built from mammoth bone standing on a plain that offered no other shelter at all. And finally, a pitched stone home dug into a windswept island in the North Sea. Every single one of those is only a partial answer, and each generation simply passed whatever remained unsolved up to the next, adding one more layer without ever knowing the full shape of what they were collectively building. The dry, thoroughly unremarkable night you're about to have wasn't invented in any single flash of insight. It was assembled, piece by piece, argument by argument, across hundreds of thousands of years, by people who mostly had no idea they were building anything at all, each one simply trying to get through one more wet, dangerous night, and leaving the underlying problem a little more solved than they had originally found it. Tonight, when you pull something warm over yourself and let the rain tap quietly against the glass while nothing bad happens at all, understand that this ordinary, forgettable moment is the actual finish line of the longest relay race in human history, and you are only ever running the very last leg of it, asleep, without even noticing the baton in your hand.